Okay, so hi again. I'm gonna make a third video because I just I rewatched the whole first one. I haven't seen the second one, but this is starting to stew in me, and I know that I haven't really brought the point home, and yet I'm starting to think it's starting to expand into other things that are all related, and they have to do with well, Gaia humanist sciences, basically understanding what happens to the collective mind, the mind of human being, uh, through time, through all of its societies, as we are affected by our own inventions that we learn to live with, coexist with, and how that will affect the unchangeable um, form of our evolved brain, our evolved mind, different to how we change as we're raised and educated after birth, but the part of our brain that evolution is responsible for making, and everything that pretty much we could speak about any other human being. In other words, there are things that I can say about any other human being. Like, for example, after 7 or 8 hours of not eating, you will get hungry. You know, there's a lot that we actually very hesitant and shy because of ideologies that have been taught to us lately. The idea of oh, God forbid you speak for somebody else. You know, there's a whole lot of things that we can say. We can use the we, the big global we, and talk about how our brain is made, how our psychology will react and be affected by our inventions. It's totally, it's totally real. It's real. It's not some outlandish, crazy idea. We just have gotten a very conditioned to judge how other what it sounds like others are thinking like, and to judge and castrate and chastise because it sounds like things that we have ideologically been taught to recognize as a certain kind of behavior that is not right or is right. But in any case, so going back to the influence of guns and weaponry, armament in the fabric of natural society, and what impact does uh, the various levels of usage a society will employ the use of guns in its life have upon the personality development of individuals in that society. And you know, I've been trying to tie in this thing about cowardice because I came up with this theory because it's not that one will be cowardly if you use a gun necessarily, although we use that expression. Like, if you take advantage of somebody that can't defend themselves, you're being a coward. But in reality, where I was coming from was from the other end, which is if a society gets used to not relying on the form, the physiological, verbal reasoning form that we have been shaped by evolution to confront and deal with difficulty, challenge, confrontation, uh, and we instead have delegated that to authority and people that can use guns to force some people to be able to walk away and others to bow down and go to jail or what have you, separate all problems that would have been resolved among people, among clan, among tribe, with the combination of speaking and posture and reasoning and argument and discussion, and even, yes, even physical violence. And we sort of devoid society of all that and increase the use of force, of strong rules, but always this idea of the gun uh, ultimately commanding upon society. It seems that it stands to reason that part that needs to continually stay exercised will start getting weak. It's almost like if we never walked and we only drove cars. Uh, that would be the civilization, the shape of our civilization we had. Um, Eventually, if we really didn't walk and we got in a car for every single thing we did, um, our legs would get very thin, flabby. We would probably have back problems. We would have lower back problems, hip whatever. We'd start having a result, a result of canceling out the average use that evolution gave us legs for. Apparently, evolution also had a lot of us sit down for a long time because we're all driving and it doesn't seem to be totally killing us. But there are other things that perhaps were very permanently robust throughout evolution, and it could be that, and we have rites of passage. We have this idea of making men be able to have courage was an important thing. So already perhaps we understood that that part of our natural selves was very useful and needed to be encouraged. And so it was really good that men even had more of this. So not only did evolution naturally endow us with a certain level of confrontational courage, before anything, before others, or before difficult danger, weather, what have you. Um, but we also had, because we hadn't invented tasers and guns and easily thrown people in jail for anything, for jaywalking, you spend 2 days in jail, or a week. I'm sure the United States has cases of people, jaywalking and smoking a joint or something, 3 months in jail. It just must be thousands of horrific. If we were able to look at each and every single case registered in the court and look at it like a life story, we'd all be horrified of what's going on, and they haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg. But I didn't want to go there. I'm more interested in Gaia humanism and what Gaia humanism is about and what it can teach us, to how it can show us a different way of resolving our the condition of humanity, the condition we put humanity in through our invention of the great and the multiple inventions of civilization. And so, the first video, what I'm saying is, it is important that we become better with adjectives and understanding all the various different subtle nuances and shades of how to use emotional adjectives and emotional nouns that speak about our feelings and emotions, and adjectives to describe those feelings. Because there are things that are really necessary to be described, and we really don't know how to talk about it because we're not used to wielding the conversation. We're not used to having this conversation as a world. As how are we doing in our relationship with our civilization invention? How is it affecting this? How's 10 years of that invention, or that way of administering society, or that way of organizing whatever institution or schools, or food industry or agriculture, or industry, or transportation industry, or however long? How is that affecting people? Meaning, we would be such masters at the design, like we designed our own Ferrari, of the biological design of the human brain and its body, that we'd be masters at that conversation. That would be the goal, is to really see what evolution made and what we got to work with, to then be able to have a well-founded and grounded field of argument. It's not conceptual. It's not ideological. It's not the latest, seemingly most intelligent or more advanced scientific theory. No, there is something very as concrete as rock, which is how evolution has made the human mind, the human body, that we can still go a lot further in describing better. And then we can say, well, obviously our hard material inert inventions of civilization, whether be they verbal, written, be they objects, machinery, are not, conceptual. They're, if they press here, they're pressing there. And so now we would actually have a realistic cause and effect discussion of how well our own inventions, or what our own inventions are affecting us. We don't have that. We've never had that as a civilization. We're elsewhere. We're all over the place. But we're never simply grounded on how we, and really having become really good at mapping what we are, how we've been shaped and formed by evolution, how we are being affected in the short term, in the long run, collectively, individually, by all these things that we continue to invent and become better at, and bigger and faster and whatever and more. And so and for that, once you get in that place of many of thousands of conversations and relationships, that would be that buffer area between the form of our mind and our body and how it is relating to being affected by or affecting also our invention. We're affecting too. There's that too. There would, I got lost. Oh yeah, we would discover that we have a lot of vocabulary missing. Heaps of vocabulary missing. We're not able to describe the subtle. We know it. We know it's there, and we hate how somebody acts when they seize an opportunity of a certain situation, and they do that, and they attack there, or they rob, or they lie, or they move quickly before anybody notices, or we see situations and it touches something, and we just know that there's something to be said there, and we don't have the words. We can't describe it, so we say things like, that was so cowardly. Was it really? I mean, the person wasn't afraid. They weren't feeling cowardice at that moment. You could describe it as cowardly if you stretch the definition to somebody who takes advantage of a defenseless person, which is how we often use cowardice. But really, there's something worse. And so, when I made the example of the war in the Falklands, Malvinas, of the British against the Argentinians tried to take back the islands. It wasn't the Argentinians even, it was this military junta that was occupying the country, and they wanted to save their own butts and do something great that the Argentinians had been wrestling and dealing with for like 150 years. And they wanted to, hey, we're going to score big points if we do this. And the Argentinians were caught by surprise. Like I said, they're not a warring country. Had it not been for the military junta, they would have never gone to war with Britain. I mean, somebody once attempted, a private pilot once landed and on the islands, it did something heroic as a citizen and planted a flag on the Malvinas. And then another time somebody hijacked an airplane and just landed it to say, hey, we landed it on our islands, And some British in Facebook like to say, oh, see, we had to shore up our defenses. But look at how violent you were getting. It's so ridiculous. The way they are actually trying to describe this war does not describe at all what really happened between these two countries. That narration is not happening. The human narration of emotional values pertinent to each culture, pertinent to each society, and this clash of these completely different societies, one with arrogance, with calculation, knowing that they were going to win, the other one not knowing what they were walking into. Some kind of knew they were going to lose, but there was nobody to to tell it to. You had to shut up, and others really didn't know, and they're not a warring kind of mentality men anyways. And when they saw real bombs going off, I mean, that was really the war that happened. The Argentinians weren't going to last more than 4 or 5 months. They didn't have more. The English could have just, waited in their boats smoking cigarettes and throwing bombs until the Argentinians exhausted all their bombs and had to surrender. They could have done that. They chose to do all the stuff they did, and 900 people died. So that well, I'm not going to go into that, but the reality of the confrontation of these two societies through their soldiers is not talked about. It's not talked about at all. It is talked about generically, like you could be talking about any other war. And so these words and these adjectives and these childish banterings are going on, but what actually happened doesn't get talked about. The British rather not talk about it, because if you start talking about this war in a human sense, and in a sense of everything that Britain knew was going to happen and could have done something about, and all of the ample opportunity it had to say, now, let's not, are you kidding? We're not going to war for this. We're not going to give you the islands, but we're not going to war you. England had all the cards, and they never once said, we want a peaceful resolution. They acted like they would go along maybe with what Peru was asking for, and the 15 days of apparent struggle. But no, this was already in the bag before. By the time the soldiers were put on the islands by the Argentine military, the British and the Americans had this in the bag already. They knew what was going to happen, what they were going to do afterwards. Perhaps what they didn't plan on was trying to accelerate it by sinking a ship and killing 300 Argentinians in order to perhaps, get it over with. But so, you see, we're really lacking a lot of vocabulary. And let's talk about, I don't know, the Palestinian situation and so many situations that, you see the hideous extremes, the contrasts. You know that so many children were killed in a week. And yet, wouldn't there be just tons of words and ways of, certainly not poetically, but intelligently, emotionally describing this, the significance of how, for example, a generalized Israeli military behavior is going about it, and a generalized, Palestinian factions are reacting about it, how they're actually needing to act to defend themselves, how they're, what despicable adjective can we use for an army that has all the weapons, has all the technology, has all the support of the most powerful two nations in the world, and all the gold of all these banks, and there's not a risk in any way whatsoever, and yet for Israel, and yet they feel that they got to do this to these. There's so many sort of ridiculous ironies. They're not ironies, but they're situations in which, why is it so hard for like a huge, powerful, rich entity to just say, here, have this, so we'll stop fighting, and then, go through your life. We got a whole world to deal with. Why do they need to grab every little, most defenseless, most pathetic, most weakest situation and turn it into a carnage? It's when the world there's so many worse things that we're being faced with. And we, like activists and people on Facebook, don't have vocabulary, language. We get stuck on ideological slogans and notions that we argue and polarize ourselves with and put ourselves against each other, and we can't describe in a non-binary, polarized way a situation from above and understand how it happened and describe all the various different forces. We're stuck in a poor languaged polarization of not being able to reach or affect any situation. It's so incredibly, it's beyond frustrating. Um, so we should be giving more importance to human sciences and the vocabulary that describes understanding the human brain and what evolution has simply made us what there is already there. We already want to be one and be friends and be together and not fight. And there's a whole bunch of forces that are created by evolution to keep the species gelled together, that we can count on. We can count on a criminal kind of wishing somehow he could heal whatever happened to him, and him never have done those crimes. That force is that redemptive force is created in the brain of human beings by evolution. Does the judicial system count on that? No, they're just too preoccupied saying, "Well, let's see. If he did this, we should be 40 years or 50 years in the dungeon. Let's give him 70 years in the dungeon then. Oh, he was holding a cigarette? Let's give him 80 years in the dungeon." Meanwhile, our human sciences that would say, "No, this person is actually a resource. If you show that you understand him, you put him with his people in a way that he starts seeing what happened to his life, we can waken up in him." I mean, these are not utopic ideas. This is science. This is real science. There are redemptive dynamics wired into the brain. We know it. We know it. We're consciously wanting to forget all the stuff that we knew only 50, 60 years ago, which were giving start to many programs. What is hard and really most sophisticatedly intelligent and advanced and progressive will be more difficult, will be more challenging, and more prone to failure. It's easier to keep somebody excited with a carrot and with a reward to make them run the treadmill and get the fruits. That's easy. Get the fruits of their wanting to have more and wanting, you know. Capitalism is easy. It's not rocket science. What is difficult is to invent a political system that configures to the natural social forms of how evolution made us before we started feeling we needed to have government, and community collectives just gathered and did their thing without anybody telling them how to organize society. We already have forces that want us to be selfish, want us to give and be generous, want us to help, want us to expect. All those forces are there, and they would give for a political system that is not about having us work for the will of what money and an object, a thing that says, you will have more of me if you can make me multiply and have me create profit, and you will have more of me, says money, right? And so, okay, we want more of it. We want more candy, more carrots, more treadmill. That is not a difficult system. It's a very loud and very busy system. It's got everybody running in that big race. Sure, it seems like, and it's producing a whole lot of stuff and changing colors and making a whole lot of bells and whistles. And so it seems like it's what brought all the wonderfulness that we are. But a more intelligent political system that tries to solve all the inherent problems with that other one would be more difficult. And yes, it stands to reason that if in an environment of confrontation, challenge, and slander and propaganda against, and belligerent birth, already having to stand against something without being able to explore its own failings initially, and fixing things, and just being able to be in peace with contemplating the difficulty of this new proposal, started in those days in Europe and in Russia by Marx and Engels and all the people and all the psychologists and all the sociologists and all the politicians that were starting to say, hey, I think that we can do better than just these simple, self-centered, power-hungry systems that we've had. But it's a lot more challenging, and immediately they're thrown into a world that thinks it's a fight, that it has that. Let's look for it. Look, see, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing. See, okay. Oh, well, of course it's going to be even more difficult. So it stands to reason that 9 out of 10 of what is, and then the only would fail or just be horrible because they get arrogant, and the human lesser sides start coming up, and we have to force this to have to make people, we'll make it work, and every time it kept getting worse, because in reality the essence of pure community politics, no, what's the name of it? Collectivism politics, or socialism, or however you want to label it, is something that is so much closer to the natural order of society that it obligatorily must be something that we are inspired to do individually. It can't be forced. It can't be obligated. Capitalism is much more obligated. It hides behind the the curtain and puts a little carrot outside. It has, but in reality, we're being obligated to chase, obligated by our own, some aspects of our human nature. But and so, what stands to reason is that collectivism would be more successful if people started getting educated. That it's in our best interest to keep the planet healthy, and all sciences and all industries and all things going towards the health of our home and our human collective, as per design, per natural design, not by something that we figure has to be the case. We each have uh, something, but somehow figure out a way that is what we would want to do if there was no political system. We would want everybody to, we wouldn't want to see anybody starving, and we wouldn't want to see anybody living on the streets, right? So we would invent, and how do we normally do it in a society that, that, I don't know, um, buys a piece of land and tries to live without any kind of political order, but in a collective community? No, we see, each person gets to take care of their place, and then they share, they pass it to somebody else, and they inherit, somebody else lets them inherit their house, and they are, but they're, basically given a piece of land, and they're given some material, and they can build their own hut. And somehow you walk into that place, and everybody, it has a shelter, and everybody has a shelter that they made themselves, and they love it, they love everything about it, and they're happy because they created how they wanted to live lovingly about life. And so far, communism systems and social systems don't really see that, don't see the organic necessity of collectivism, and that therefore a system, an administrative political system that would configure more to our natural evolutionary design. And the ones that succeeded more are the ones that kind of mixed in with what we already had. So capitalistic countries became more social democratic countries, and China, as soon as it came out of its pit of starvation and famine and what have you, immediately saw. Well, I haven't really analyzed this too much, but they saw that it wasn't just because it's not just because they believe free enterprise and capitalism is the way to grow. I think that they realized that they need to be tied into the world, and that was it. You know, they had to do, they had to do it that more like the capitalists in order to get where they want to get. But who knows in the future if once, if indeed China no longer feels they're threatened by the United States or Europe and can do whatever it wants, like today the United States feels it can do whatever it wants, or Europe or what have you, will they want to have a country so capitalistic and so, and not maybe go back to some ideas more genuine and of them, of their own culture, of their own very, very ancient people, remains to be seen. So I totally went off here somewhere else, and I'm not even sure. Oh yeah, I described already. Um, Yeah, I think I pretty much said everything I want to say. Okay, that's it. Thanks. Ciao.